The shot caller walked up to the quiet new inmate and demanded respect tax, like he owned the place. 6 minutes later, the entire prison understood that real power doesn't need to announce itself. It just is. But before we get to that moment, if you're enjoying these prison stories where intelligence meets raw power, we post new videos every single day. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss these incredible true stories from behind the walls. Now, to understand how a routine new inmate intimidation turned into a complete restructuring of prison hierarchy, we need to go back to the beginning. It was Indiana Youth Center, March 1992, Tuesday afternoon, around 2:30 p.m. during recreation period. The yard was filled with the usual prison activities: weightlifting, card games, hushed business conversations, and the constant territorial positioning that determines who controls what in the complex ecosystem of incarceration. Lorenzo King Washington surveyed his domain from his usual spot near the basketball court, where 8 years of systematic violence and strategic alliances had made him the undisputed shot caller for 3 cell blocks. At 6 feet 4 inches and 260 pounds, with scars that told stories of battles won and enemies eliminated, King represented everything dangerous about long-term institutional power. King wasn't just big, he was smart. Prison smart, street smart. The kind of intelligence that comes from surviving places where wrong decisions get you killed and right decisions build empires within concrete walls. He controlled drug distribution, gambling operations, protection rackets, and most importantly, the information networks that determined who lived comfortably and who lived in fear. His crew consisted of 12 loyal soldiers who'd proven their worth through violence and dedication to King's vision of prison order. They controlled 3 cell blocks, managed relationships with guards who found cooperation more profitable than conflict, and eliminated problems before they became threats to organizational stability. But King's greatest skill wasn't violence, it was reading people. New inmates, guards, administration officials, rival gangs. He could assess someone's strengths, weaknesses, and potential usefulness within minutes of observation. That ability had kept him alive and powerful for 8 years, in an environment where both were constantly under threat. Today, King had noticed something interesting. A new arrival, small guy, maybe 5 feet 8 inches, sitting alone at a picnic table near the far fence, reading a book, like prison yard politics, didn't exist. Most new inmates either immediately sought protection from established groups or tried to project dangerous image to avoid testing. This guy was doing neither. That made King curious and slightly annoyed. Curious because unusual behavior usually indicated hidden capabilities or connections. Annoyed because disregarding prison hierarchy undermined the order that kept his empire functioning smoothly. The new inmate had been processed yesterday, assigned to King's block, but hadn't followed normal protocols for introduction to power structure. No respect payment, no acknowledgement of authority, no indication that he understood how survival worked in this environment. King's lieutenant, Marcus Blade Johnson, approached his position near the basketball court. "King, you see that new fish over there? Been sitting by himself all day, acting like he don't know where he is." King looked toward the picnic table where the quiet figure continued reading, apparently unaware that his behavior was creating problems for people whose survival depended on maintaining established territorial boundaries. "What you hear about him?" King asked, always gathering intelligence before making tactical decisions that might affect organizational stability. Blade shrugged. "Nothing much. Some kind of celebrity, they say. Boxing or something. But he looks small, quiet. Probably just another rich boy who gonna learn prison ain't about money. King nodded thoughtfully. Celebrity status could be valuable if managed properly, dangerous if it attracted unwanted administrative attention. Either way, territorial authority required establishment of proper hierarchy regardless of outside reputation. Time to educate him about respect and protocol, King decided, standing from his position with the particular confidence that comes from 8 years of unchallenged institutional authority. King's approach attracted attention throughout the yard. Inmates paused their activities, recognizing that something significant was developing when the shot caller personally handled new inmate orientation rather than delegating to subordinates. Mike Tyson continued reading his book, a biography of Alexander the Great, unaware that his preference for solitude and education had been interpreted as disrespect by prison power structures he hadn't yet bothered to understand or acknowledge. Mike's first week had been deliberately low-key. He'd observed institutional dynamics, identified key players, and assessed potential threats while maintaining the kind of quiet dignity that made systematic observation possible without attracting premature confrontation. His cellmate, Carlos Rivera, had warned him about King's territorial expectations and suggested appropriate respect protocols. But Mike's Brooklyn conditioning made him reluctant to show submission to anyone before understanding their actual capabilities versus their institutional reputation. "Yo, fresh fish!" King called out, his voice carrying across the yard with authority that made conversations stop and attention focus on developing confrontation. Mike looked up from his book, meeting King's eyes with calm assessment rather than fear or defiance that King expected from new arrivals, facing shot-caller attention. "That's me you talking to?" Mike asked politely, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than challenge to King's authority. King positioned himself where Mike would have to look up to maintain eye contact, using physical positioning to establish dominance hierarchy that 8 years of institutional control had refined into psychological art. "Yeah, that's you. You've been in my house for 2 days without showing proper respect or paying orientation fees that keep new inmates safe from problems they can't handle." Mike closed his book, giving King his full attention while processing the power dynamics and territorial claims that apparently governed social interaction in this environment. "I wasn't aware of fees or protocols," Mike said calmly. "Perhaps you could explain the system so I can understand my obligations." King's crew had gathered in a loose circle, creating audience for whatever demonstration might be necessary to establish proper hierarchy with this new inmate who seemed confused about prison reality. "System's simple," King explained, his voice loud enough for other inmates to hear educational opportunity about institutional authority. "I keep order in 3 blocks. I make sure weak inmates don't get hurt by stronger inmates. I control business that makes commissary money available for people who need extras." King stepped closer, using his size advantage to create psychological pressure. All that protection and opportunity costs money. New inmates pay respect tax. Ongoing inmates pay territory fees. Everyone contributes to organizational stability. Mike listened carefully, understanding both the practical economics and power structure that King had developed over 8 years of institutional survival and advancement. "That makes sense from business perspective," Mike agreed. "Organization requires funding. Leadership requires respect. Protection requires payment. What's the fee structure?" King was slightly surprised by Mike's intelligent response, rather than resistance or submission he usually encountered during new inmate orientation sessions. "Depends on what kind of protection you need, what kind of business opportunities you want access to, how much trouble you might cause for organizational stability." King assessed Mike's appearance, demeanor, and apparent resources while calculating appropriate fee structure for someone whose celebrity status might be valuable, but whose quiet confidence suggested potential complications. For you, fresh fish, orientation fee is $200. Monthly territory tax is $50. Business participation fees depend on what services you want to purchase or sell. Mike nodded thoughtfully. Reasonable rates for comprehensive services, but I should probably understand exactly what I'm purchasing before committing to ongoing financial obligations. King's expression shifted slightly. Most inmates either paid immediately out of fear or challenged the system through bravado. Mike was treating this like business negotiation, which suggested either dangerous naivety or capabilities that weren't immediately visible. You questioning my authority, fresh fish? You think this is discussion instead of instruction about how survival works in here? Mike's response revealed psychological conditioning that King's institutional experience hadn't prepared him to assess accurately. I'm not questioning anything. I'm just trying to understand the value proposition before making financial commitments that will affect my situation for the next 6 years. Mike stood from the picnic table, not aggressively, just repositioning himself for conversation that required standing rather than looking up at someone trying to establish dominance through height advantage. See, King, can I call you King? I've been in situations where understanding power structure was important for survival, but I've also learned that real power doesn't usually need to collect fees to prove itself. King's eyes narrowed. This quiet new inmate was either completely clueless about prison reality or operating from confidence source that institutional reputation couldn't immediately identify or categorize. Real power? Fresh fish. You've been in here 2 days. I've been running this place for 8 years. I decide who eats well, who sleeps safely, who gets protection when problems develop. That's real power. Mike nodded respectfully. 8 years is impressive. Building organizational structure that maintains order while generating revenue requires intelligence, patience, and capability that most people don't possess. Mike's acknowledgement of King's achievements diffused some of the tension while establishing that he understood and respected institutional accomplishments without necessarily submitting to their authority. But here's what I learned from my experiences outside these walls, Mike continued. Power that depends on fear and payment is different from power that comes from respect earned through demonstrated capability. King realized this conversation had evolved beyond routine new inmate orientation into philosophical discussion about authority, respect, and the foundations of institutional control. Demonstrated capability. What capability you demonstrated, fresh fish? You've been sitting alone reading books like prison politics don't apply to you. Mike extended his right hand toward King in gesture that appeared respectful, but carried implications that King's institutional experience hadn't encountered during 8 years of unchallenged authority. Why don't we shake hands, King? Person to person. You can tell me about how you built your organization, and I can explain what kind of experience I bring to institutional environment. King hesitated. Something about Mike's confidence and willingness to initiate physical contact suggested capabilities that quiet demeanor and small size hadn't advertised accurately. But refusing handshake would appear weak in front of crew, and watching inmates whose respect determined his continued authority over 3 cell blocks and complex organizational structure. King reached out and grabbed Mike's hand, intending to demonstrate grip strength that would establish physical dominance and remind this new inmate about size differences that mattered in institutional conflicts. That's when King learned something that would completely change his understanding of prison hierarchy, personal capability, and what real power actually meant when it encountered institutional authority built on intimidation rather than authentic strength. Mike's handshake wasn't just strong, it was controlled in a way that immediately communicated capabilities that 8 years of prison experience had never encountered or prepared King to understand or counter effectively. Within 10 seconds, King's institutional confidence transformed into recognition that he'd made critical assessment error about someone whose dangerous reputation exceeded anything prison politics could replicate or challenge. "Jesus Christ," King whispered, trying to pull his hand back, but discovering that Mike's grip controlled when and how that would happen. What kind of strength is that? Mike maintained controlled pressure while providing educational information that transformed King's understanding of power dynamics and personal capability assessment. 25 years of training that started in Brooklyn streets and went through professional boxing, King. Strength development that was tested by necessity rather than choice, refined by competition that made institutional conflicts look controlled and predictable. King's eyes widened as Mike's background information penetrated his assessment calculations and forced complete re-evaluation of tactical situation and organizational implications. "You're Mike Tyson," King said. Not as question but as statement that explained everything about this interaction that had confused his institutional intelligence and survival instincts. Mike released King's hand and stepped back, his demonstration complete through controlled education rather than destructive humiliation that would create ongoing organizational problems. Just another inmate trying to do his time with dignity and respect, King. Not looking to challenge your organization or disrupt structures that maintain institutional stability. King massaged feeling back into his hand while processing complete reversal of power assessment that required fundamental recalculation of territorial authority and organizational hierarchy. The yard had gone quiet, inmates recognizing that something significant had occurred, even if they couldn't hear specific details of conversation that had transformed routine new inmate orientation into educational experience about authentic capability. "Mike Tyson," King said again, his voice carrying mixture of respect and amazement that replaced the territorial aggression he'd approached with initially. "Nobody told me Mike Tyson was the new arrival. I thought you was just another celebrity who'd learned prison reality the hard way." Mike's response demonstrated wisdom about institutional politics and long-term survival that impressed King more than physical capability demonstration. Celebrity status doesn't change anything about doing time with respect for people who've earned their position through years of survival and leadership. Your organization provides valuable services. Your authority maintains order that benefits everyone. Mike paused, looking around at King's crew and the watching inmates whose respect determined institutional power structures. "I'm not here to challenge what you built. I'm just here to serve my sentence with dignity while learning from people whose experience I respect." King's worldview had shifted fundamentally through encounter with someone whose capabilities exceeded institutional framework, while demonstrating wisdom about organizational cooperation rather than territorial disruption. "Damn, Mike. You could run this whole place if you wanted. Your reputation, your capabilities, inmates would follow you anywhere." Mike shook his head. "Running places isn't my goal, King. Surviving with integrity is my goal. Learning from experiences is my goal. Maintaining relationships that make hard times manageable is my goal." King extended his hand again, this time for handshake that represented mutual respect rather than dominance testing. Mike Tyson, you got my respect and my organization's protection, not because you're stronger than me, though you definitely stronger than me, but because you handled this situation with intelligence and wisdom. They shook hands as equals, King's grip respectful rather than competitive, Mike's grip demonstrating controlled power without intimidation. King, I appreciate the protection and respect. How about we work together to make sure institutional order serves everyone's interests without creating unnecessary problems for administration or other inmates? Over the next 6 years, Mike Tyson and King Washington developed mutual respect that transcended typical inmate relationships into genuine friendship based on shared understanding about survival, leadership, and institutional navigation. King's organization continued controlling territory and business, but with Mike's influence toward reducing violence and increasing educational opportunities that prepared inmates for successful release. Mike served his sentence with King's protection, but also contributed his own capability toward institutional stability and conflict resolution that made their cell blocks safer and more productive than other areas. Years later, King credited Mike Tyson encounter as educational experience that taught him about different types of power, different approaches to leadership, and why authentic capability commanded more respect than institutional intimidation. Mike could have taken over everything first day, King tells other former inmates. But he chose cooperation over conquest, wisdom over warfare, respect over fear. That taught me more about real leadership than 8 years of running prison politics. The lesson transcends correctional experience. It's about understanding that authentic power serves community rather than dominating it, that real strength protects rather than threatens, and that true leadership earns respect through character rather than extracting it through intimidation. One shot caller learned that lesson through direct demonstration that assumptions about capability and authority can be dramatically incorrect when authentic power chooses cooperation over conflict, wisdom over warfare, and institutional stability over personal domination. Indiana Youth Center still houses inmates serving long sentences, but veterans will tell newcomers about the day the shot caller met Mike Tyson and learned that real power doesn't need to demand respect. It earns respect through character that serves community rather than exploiting it for personal advantage. The 6 minutes that transformed institutional hierarchy from intimidation-based authority into respect-based cooperation, territorial control into collaborative leadership, and prison politics into educational opportunity about what authentic capability means when it chooses wisdom over warfare in environments designed to bring out the worst in human nature.